Hello, and welcome to Carousel Chat's Menagerie. I'm Marissa Sieb, the Education Coordinator at the Herschell Carousel Factory Museum. Carousel Chats are a free virtual lecture program series presented by the Herschell Carousel Factory Museum and made possible by the Museum Association of New York Building Capacity Grant. Tonight's presenters are Emily Ma Rogers from Glen Echo Park, Stephanie Hornyak from the Grand Rapids Public Museum, and Doug Bathke from the Herschell Carousel Factory Museum. If you have any questions during the presentations, please place them in the Q&A box or in the chat. And our first presenter is Emily.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Ma Rogers. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Glen Echo Park Partnership for Arts and Culture. So happy to be here with everyone tonight discussing menagerie carousels. I also want to thank the Herschell Carousel Factory Museum for hosting this wonderful talk, as well as my fellow speakers for today. Looking forward to a great conversation. And so I'm going to just share my screen really fast because I have a short presentation. And so I will, as I'm doing this, I will just put a disclaimer out there. I am not a carousel expert or historian. I find that I can talk fairly well about our carousel at Glen Echo Park. It's a 1921 Denzel carousel, but I am not an expert all things Denzel by any means. So my talk today will be focusing mostly on our specific carousel, its unique history, why we think it's an amazing piece of art and history. But I unfortunately am not an expert in that in everything Denzel. So I'm happy to refer folks to people that know much more than I do. We have a lot of contacts in that sphere when it comes to the history of our carousel and history of Denzel, but my talk will be primarily focused on our specific carousel and its unique history as well as characteristics. And so just to zoom out a little bit, for those that are not familiar with Glen Echo Park, we are located just outside Washington, D.C. We're probably about a 15-minute drive from the border, located in Montgomery County, Maryland, not too far from Virginia as well, just over the Potomac River. So we benefit a lot from being kind of in this somewhat metropolitan area, but we actually have a long history dating back to the early or the late 1800s. We started as a Chautauqua retreat. Back then, we were considered a rural area. And so two twin brothers who made their fortune off of inventing a new kind of egg beater decided to start a Chautauqua retreat just outside Washington, D.C., where people could take classes, listen to concerts, just have a great enriching cultural and arts experience. And they established Glen Echo Park with that goal in mind. Unfortunately, it did not succeed. After the first season, it actually ended up failing. After a few other attempts at doing other things, they ended up selling the park and the land and the buildings and everything that was there to an electric company that also ran a trolley. And Glen Echo Park for about 65 years was an amusement park. We were a trolley park at the end of a trolley line that went from Georgetown in downtown DC all the way out to Glen Echo, with the park at the end of the line. And so you can see kind of the different layers of we call them eras at the park. And so the amusement park period is what a lot of people remember Glen Echo as. It was the premier amusement park in the DC area. And that's how we ended up getting our carousel in 1921. In 1968, after the park closed, it was privately owned and now was a really great piece of real estate right off the Potomac River, not too far from DC, as I mentioned. We're near the Capitol Beltway as well. And so the owners decided that they wanted to potentially develop the site, and the federal government stepped in, wanting to save the site, not because it was an old amusement park, but because it was actually ecologically important. We're right off the Potomac River, like I mentioned. We're in an area called Potomac Palisades, and they wanted to preserve that. So Fast forward a little bit more, we are actually a national park site. The National Park Service actually owns this carousel through an agreement that they have with Montgomery County and my organization, the Glen Park Partnership for Arts and Culture. We all work together to maintain everything that we have at Glen Park, but also in addition to that, the carousel, which like I mentioned, is actually owned by the National Park Service. So just to dive back into the carousel, we are, like I said, a 1921 Densel carousel. It was made in 1921, which is when William H. Densel was running the company. His father had started it. He had taken over after his father's death. And so I had found this kind of some excerpts from what I think is a sales brochure talking about the carousels and organs that the Densel Carousel Company was making. And so you can see here, he's kind of talking about, the name Densel has been associated with the manufacture of carousels, and he's talking about how wonderful their carousels are. And I love the line that he has in this kind of highlighted paragraph here. All our animals are of a lifelike design, the coloring and shape being as natural as it is possible to make them. And when I show pictures later, you will see that they did do a lot of work in hand carving these animals to look very lifelike, but also like they're moving as well. You'll see a lot of movement in the mane and the way that the horses are just positioned. So yeah, I love that description that they have there. And so the carousel comes in 1921 to Glen Park. This is actually a picture of the carousel after it was installed in 1921. And it ended up becoming, a showpiece for both the Densel Company and Glen Park. The parks manager at the time would bring other amusement park managers in to just kind of show off the carousel and brag a little bit. And Densel, as you can see here in this picture, use it for ads to sell his other carousels. And what I love about this picture is that if you were to compare this picture with a picture that we have, of the carousel now, it looks very similar. The animals are still all there. Nothing has left the carousel. Everything that you see, except for the band organ, which was upgraded in 1926, is pretty much the same. The house hasn't, the building hasn't changed or anything else like that. So what's on our Menagerie carousel? As hopefully many of you know, being on this call, Menagerie carousel is not just filled with horses, but has other animals on it as well. And so we have 52 animals in total. You can see the list here. And I put up just a few pictures of some of the animals that we have here. We are a 3 abreast carousel. The outside row is all standers, and then the inner 2 are jumpers. And I personally put some of these up here because I have 2 children, 10 and 7, and the rabbit is my daughter's favorite and the lion is my son. So I had to squeeze that in there. But we have a lot of different animals on here. It's always fun to talk to both children and adults alike, just to ask what their favorite animal is. It's always a conversation starter, and what animal are you going to ride next? And it's always fun to also educate the public as to, this is unique because it is a menagerie carousel. And so a lot of people have the thought of a carousel being just horses, and it's always fun when people can come here and ride a rabbit or ride a deer or a giraffe, and be able to kind of experience the carousel that way. And so it's hard to talk about our carousel and its history without also recognizing its important part in the civil rights history in the DC area. As I think I mentioned earlier, when the Glen Echo was an amusement park, it was privately owned, and unfortunately at that time was also segregated. In 1960, a group of Howard University students, inspired by the lunch counter sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, decided to stage a sit-in at Glen Echo Park on the carousel. And so you can see in this picture on the right, One of those students, Marvis Saunders, is sitting on the same rabbit that I had in the previous picture. And he is here and interacting with the security guard for the amusement park because at that point, they were not allowed to be on the carousel. The students were arrested for trespassing, but this kind of sparked a whole summer of protests and picket lines in front of the entrance to Glen Park, protesting the segregationist policies that they had at the park at the time. And so you can see in the picture on the right or the left top, we had picketers here every day in the heat of summer in DC, which is hot and it's humid and it's muggy. And they were there every day from opening to closing until the park closed for the season in September, protesting, like I said, the segregationist policies. They were successful, I'm happy to say. Before the amusement park opened the next year in 1961, they announced that the park would be open for everyone. Additionally, the Howard University students, their case ended up going all the way up to the Supreme Court, during which all the charges were dropped against them, and many of them ended up continuing in their fight for civil rights. Some of them were freedom riders. We had some others that became state senators as well, and so it was this was kind of the first step for many of them in their fight for civil rights. In 1970, which was after the park closed as an amusement park, many of the rides were being sold or destroyed or taken down, and the carousel was actually no exception to that. Carousel was sold to a collector in California, and when the local community heard about that, they approached the collector and said, what can we do to save the carousel and keep it in Glen Park? And he said, if you can raise $80,000 and give that to me within a month, I will sell the carousel back to you. They did a lot of groundwork. You can see the newspaper clippings here on the slide. They were able to raise the $80,000. Some of it was, large gifts. We had a big anonymous donation, but there were also people chipping in, $5, $10, $20 to save the carousel. And so they were able to raise the money. They bought the carousel as well as the band organ back from the collector and ended up giving it to the National Park Service, which is why it's in National Park Service's control, but also how it ended up staying at Glen Park, which is fairly unique. Most carousels have journeyed around different locations. So we do like to highlight that this was something that the community ended up stepping in to save the carousel. The woman, Nancy Long, that's mentioned here, is still with us, and she comes by and she still rides the carousel. And, she has great stories to tell from the month-long fundraising campaign that they ran. So our carousel is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was listed in 1980. I have a part of the nomination here on the screen. It was also documented by the Historic American Buildings Survey, which is HABS, in 1994. And in that, they noted that the carousel was one of 16 of its original site in the country. Now, I'm not too sure. I wasn't able to fact check whether or not that still is the case, if that number is still correct. But like I said earlier, when I was talking about the saving of the carousel, we're pretty proud of the fact that the carousel is not left. None of the animals have left. No pieces of that carousel have left the park except for when we restored it. So I know Rosa Patton was on another previous lecture, so she is the expert, and I would refer anyone who is interested in the restoration process to certainly check her talk out. I will also say that we did a lecture with her as well, specifically about our carousel when she was demonstrating different techniques that she did as well. So, the only time those horses and animals have left the carousel is to go down to her shop in North Carolina, to be, removing the park paint, documenting the original colors, and then repainting and varnishing all the animals and then bringing them back. So it was a 20-year process. Rosa has been, when she was up this spring, we realized she has been involved in the carousel for 40 years. So it was clearly a labor of love, and she is just an amazing woman and friend. So we're so pleased to have her and involved in the carousel. And like I said, I would encourage anyone to check out her lecture because she is a wealth of information when it comes to carousel art in the form of, restoring, and is just a really talented woman. So Carrousel has been at the park for 102 years, and we celebrated the Carousel's 100th anniversary in 2021 with a lot of programming for a majority of that year. Some of it was in person, a lot of it was virtual because of the pandemic and shifting restrictions that we had to work around in terms of in-person gatherings. And so if anyone is interested, I would encourage you to check out our website. We still have a lot of that virtual content online. We have some lectures as well as some information about the carousel up there as well. We also have a documentary that's being made at the moment called Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round about the 1960 protests and sit-in at the carousel. And then I just wanted to highlight this horse that we have here. It was actually the first horse that we had restored, and it is blocked off because it is actually 90% of that is the original paint. And then it was varnished, and we don't allow folks to ride that because we are trying to kind of preserve the original paint there and just kind of wanting to show that layer. Additionally, it does have an image that does convey a racial stereotype. So part of that sign that is posted there does kind of address the fact that while potentially something like this was more common in 1921, clearly things have changed in the past 102 years. And maybe, and it's not something that we would normally see these days on maybe a newer carousel. So it does kind of acknowledge that caricature that's there, that racial stereotype, and just kind of acknowledging that while that might have been something that might have been a little bit more common 100 years ago, it's a little different now. So where we are today, just to wrap everything up, we are, like I said, operated and managed by the Glen Park Partnership for Arts and Culture, which is my organization, with support from Montgomery County and the National Park Service. And so we operate May through September. You can see the wonderful carousel in this picture. And so we have families and summer camps that come through, and we're operating actually this year until October 1st, just to give us a little bit more time. We usually welcome around 50,000 riders annually. That changed a bit during COVID, obviously, but looking at our attendance thus far, it's been fairly strong with definitely people coming back out, enjoying the carousel. We see a lot of multi-generational families enjoying it. And so I just love this picture because if you'll recall the old picture that I showed from the 1921 install, it looks very similar to what we have here. And you can see just the wonderful work that Rosa did in restoring all of these wonderful animals to be looking the way they do now. We touch them every year or so just to keep it looking wonderful. But we're pretty darn proud of our carousel. So I'm putting up our website here, glenecopark.org/carousel, if anyone is interested. Like I said, we have some virtual content left over from our carousel 100th anniversary that I would encourage folks to check out. We also have a virtual ranger tour from the National Park Service talking about more about the history. And Ranger Kevin is wonderful at talking about that. And then I have my contact information if anyone is interested. And that is the end of mine. So I will go ahead and stop sharing, and I will mute myself as well.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Emily. Our next presenter is Stephanie.
Hi, everybody. I am Stevie Hornyak, and I work at the Grand Rapids Public Museum. I am the exhibits manager. I also work on the carousel, and I also have been doing the restoration as the project manager for our carousel. So I'm going to give you guys a brief history. So our carousel is a 1928 Spillman carousel. It's a classic wood park carousel. So we have ceilings. I believe this is one of 3 that Spillman ever made. It's 50 feet with 3 rows, 40 jumping horses, 4 standard horses, 6 menagerie animals, 2 chariots, and has a mixture of Spillman engineering, Louvre, and Carmel figures. Our carousel is located on the Grand Rapids River, which is called the Grand River, right downtown. So you can see it's a circular pavilion that looks out. The carousel originally was from Lakewood Park. It was home there from 1928 to 1982. It was an amusement park owned by the Glen family. They started the park in 1916 and it closed in 1984. The park had other like roller coasters, swimming pools. It was like a camping ground. And in 1982 was when Peter Cook and Dave Maney wanted to go out there and see what the carousel would be like. So we used to have a carousel at Ramona Park and they wanted to purchase that one, but then that one wasn't available anymore because it had accidentally gotten broken up and sold off. So that's why they traveled out to Lakewood Park, and it was the same owner. So like the Wayne family, they own the same thing from like 1920 to 1982, and everything is original that we know of, even though we have 3 different carvers on our carousel. So in 1982, we started the first restoration. It took about 12 years to complete. They used oil-based automotive paint. The figures were sprayed. They did not restore the animals to the original color palette, and each animal took about 300 hours. We believe some of them were, it was taken all the way down to bare wood, but since we started doing our home restoration work on it, we noticed that not all of the animals originally were taken down to bare wood. So right now I'm going to go through some of the animals so you can see what it was like when we purchased it in 1982 and then also from the 1994 restoration. So we have a goat, and it's Spillman Engineering, and you can see what it looked like when we purchased it and then after the restoration. Here's the lion, which is also a Spillman Engineering. The giraffe. The deer. The tiger. And the camel. And the camel is the only one that's a Louvre, which is different. So in 2019, we decided that we needed to get some mechanical repairs done. So we reached out to Carousels and Carvings, and they decided to help us with a lot of our mechanical repairs. And they also decided to help us and partner with us on helping us restore our figures. We started the project again with Peter and Imogene Cook Foundation. As I was saying, Peter Cook was one of the people that went up and got the carousel from the beginning. So they've been partnering with us for almost 30 years. They just love the carousel just as much as we do, and as well as the community. We decided in our exhibits department that we have a lot of talented artists and woodworkers in our area. So we decided to do a lot of it in-house as much as possible. And like I said, we partner with Carousels and Carvings for anything that's extensive when it comes to any of the restoration. We also decided to change it from oil-based paint to water-based paint. And the reason why we decided to do that is our carousel runs like 365 days out of the year. So it's been it can be challenging for us to remove an animal, take it all the way upstairs to our 4th floor where our shop is, to spray it and then bring it back down. And as you saw, like on the river, it's all enclosed. And so we were concerned about the toxic fumes. So one of the things that we decided to do is convert to a water-based paint and then also hand paint it so that we can actually touch up the animals right down there in the pavilion. The water-based paint that we decided to use is something called Nova mural paint. And we actually use a Benmore paint too. That's the Aura brand because it's got more of an acrylic binder in it. We also use like Varathane semi-gloss as the top coat, which has actually been quite successful in the last year. We've noticed as a good test. So the Varathane is what they use on gym floors. And so it's actually, it holds up to a lot of good feet. Again, when we decided to go back to go to the water-based paint, we decided to like stick with the 1994 restoration color palette, but we wanted to change it up with the body modeling. So we wanted it to be more realistic and natural instead of some of the animals were originally stylized, painted. So what we decided to do is use a lot of stippling and sponging techniques so that it would be easy to touch up really quickly. And we also decided to do research. So what I started to do first is out of our 6 menagerie animals, I picked 6 specific different types of animals that we were going to actually paint it to. So the giraffe is painted as a reticulated giraffe. And as you can see, this is a couple of pictures of us actually stripping the paint in-house. And there I am painting on the floor. And so that was one of the things that we wanted to do again is try to keep it a more natural, realistic look. So there really wasn't a pattern like before, which you'll see in the next slide. It was all just kind of by figure. So here's an image of the reticulated with the pattern that I chose. And you can see how it looks presently and the detail version. And you can see the difference between the 1994 version and the present version. The deer was the second animal that we decided to work on as the menagerie. So this one we had to send down to Carousels and Carvings because the antlers are actually real and they were unfortunately destroyed. So Todd had to get us some new antlers, and he sent us some really good photos of them restoring them, as you can see right here. Here's some more images of the layering process with us painting. We based the deer on the white-tailed deer. The deer is actually the Michigan state animal, so that's why we chose that. And you can see the body modeling and a detailed version of that. You can see the 1994 version compared to the present. We have 2 menagerie animals that we are currently working on. So this is a picture of the goat. This is down in, again, Todd's shop with Carousels and Carvings. We had to get the leg, unfortunately had gotten kicked and broken. So he was restoring that for us as well as the horns. So we're going to base the goat on this Dutch Landrace goat. And as you can see, actually, I took this picture yesterday. They're still in the process of painting it. So there's a couple of painters working on animals. The camel is another one that we're working on currently. So one of the things with the restoration that we noticed is when we started taking a lot of things down to bare wood, like I said earlier, this is one of the ones where we noticed that somebody did some other kind of maintenance on it that nobody noticed before. And so when we finally stripped down to bare wood, we could see where there was all these nail holes and drilling and things were rusted out. They must have added more extra dowels in places. So the stability of the camel was not very secure. So we sent this down to Todd again, and he helped us restore the legs. So we're basing the camel on the dromedary camel. And as you can see, Lisa painting on it right now. And these are our two restored ones on the carousel that we have at the present moment. So there's the deer and the giraffe. And that is all I have for my presentation. Thank you so much.
Stephanie, thank you so much for that interesting presentation. And now it's time for Doug from the Herschell Carousel Factory Museum.
Okay, Marissa, put the photo up, please. I'd like to welcome everyone to my part of the chat for the Herschell Carousel Factory Museum. We're located in North Tonawanda, New York. We are housed in the former factory of the Allen Herschell Company. Our museum concentrates on the 4 companies in town that were involved in making carousels: the Armitage Herschell Company, the Herschell Spillman Company, Spillman Engineering Corporation, and the Allen Herschell Company. We have a 1916 all wooden carousel that we operate, and we do not have any menagerie animals on that machine, but we do have menagerie animals in our collection. So I'd like to present a variety of photos to you that are either from our collection or animals that one of those 4 companies would have made in their processes. First is a pig. This has been found on a variety of machines done by Allen Herschell and Herschell Spillman. And the entire animal is carved except for the tail, which is a small curlicue of iron. I've seen this in a variety of manners with usually the same pose for the pig, but I've seen it with stalks of corn coming out of its mouth as though it had been running through the farmer's field stealing his crops. The next is a zebra. This isn't considered a wild horse, so the factories, at least our factories, never put saddles on them as far as carved saddles go. The prior owner of this painted a saddle on it because it said that people were uneasy for sitting on a horse, whether it was wild or not, that had no saddle. Next is a rooster, typical of what Allen Herschell did. Different pose than some of the Herschels. Denzel was also known to have a unique rooster in its collections. And next is a dog. Herschell had this fuzzy style dog, I call it. Also found in many machines. They usually, other companies would have a dog and it would be like a greyhound type of dog rather than a dog you may find in the home. And the next one is an ostrich. Now, this is not much different than some of the other companies' ostriches, but this one is unique to the menagerie world. It's not different in its style, but it's different in its history. The ostrich, when we obtained it, had a lot of the glue was drying out, and it had a situation where it had started to delaminate and fall apart. And our restoration crew decided it was time to try to save this nice bird. So as they started dismantling it so that they could clean up all the joints and stuff for the restoration, they found in the hollow body the statement from Ben Heim that he was carving this on Christmas Eve, 1906. Now, what makes that so unique is all the carvers at these factories were simply that. They were employees of the companies, and no one is allowed to sign any of their work. So as more and more research is being done on different factories, and it's being realized what some of the names of these different carvers were, especially the master carvers, they often will say, well, this animal was carved by so-and-so. And it's really not true unless they have some type of proof like this. They may have carved it. They may have been very involved in a certain company having a certain style of carving to their birds or their animals altogether. But there's really no proof that this or that person specifically carved that animal. So we're quite proud that when in our restoration efforts, we not only were able to save it to look nice on the outside, but we have proof that Ben Heim, who was a carver for both Herschel Spillman and Alan Herschel, he glued animals together and he also carved animals, and he was proud enough to sign it in 1906. Next one is a polar bear. It's a lot of companies have unique animals that only they carved, and the polar bear is one of them that Alan Herschel Company had. As others have said tonight, oftentimes you'll have a ride that's 3 or 4 abreast, and the outside row will be standing animals. So this was a chance that the Herschel Company could carve a polar bear, very unique, and obviously one of the standing animals, meaning it did not go up and down. Next is a kangaroo. This was carved by the Herschel Spillman Company, and it's, I believe, the only kangaroo that had ever been carved in the menagerie world. The next is an elephant that the Alan Herschel Company carved. Once again, it's very unique that the basket is where the riders would have been, obviously, and once again, only this one was ever carved by the Alan Herschel Company. Next is our favorite hop toad, named after the hop toad in the Wind in the Willow story, is carved by the Herschel Spillman Company. It's the only carousel animal of all the companies that has human clothes. You can see his nice blue pantaloons and a nice red vest and jacket, and not easy to see here, but he also around his collar has a nice bow tie to be rather dapperly dressed. The next one is a cat. And this is kind of unique to the Herschel Company in that the cats were always friendly, happy cats. The Denzel Company, for example, always carved cats that had either a bird or a fish in its mouth, showing that it was a little feistier, I guess. But Herschel cats were always carved with some kind of a smile, a little decorative trim, kind of a mild pussycat. I think that's all I have as far as the individual animals. I'd just like to make a comment that some of the menagerie animals that were produced, various companies produce the same type of animals. We have a catalog from the Spillman Engineering Corporation that lists actually 14 different animals in one catalog, where besides the variety of shapes of horses, you could also get lions and tigers, ostriches, deer, goats, zebras, roosters, frogs, cats, and a variety of dogs. Most of the park machines, as I said, were very large, and a park machine is a machine that will not travel. It will rest in a park for its entire life. So as a result, you can have 2, 3, or 4 abreast animals, and then an outside row of these larger menagerie animals that are standers, meaning they do not go up and down. Our machine happens to be a portable machine, which was the bread and butter business for the Alan Herschel Company. And even though they traveled, the carvers at these companies were capable of making any type of carving that you wanted. We've seen in the area at one time, I believe it's Alcott Beach, Rialto Park had a 2 abreast children's size carousel, and it had two pigs, 2 dogs, 2 horses, 2 chickens, and on around the carousel for only 2 abreast, probably only 24 animals. It was very expensive to have a menagerie animal carved. We have records. I had the opportunity to talk to one of the former carvers from the Carrousel factory, Alan Herschel Company, and he said that the apprentices were known to carve the legs as beginning carvers, and they had to do 6 legs a day. The body carvers were considered better skilled or journeymen. They would do a full body from scratch and then half of a second body. And the master carvers would do the heads and necks, put all the other parts together, make sure everything blended. And as a result, with that type of a production line process for the carvers, it was the 1.5 animals per carver per day could be completed. So it really didn't take that long to do a full machine with 24 animals minimum. Most had 36. And as you've heard from the ladies earlier, that some of the machines were up to 50, 52 animals. So a lot of work had to be done. I think the carvers were capable of making any type of carving, as I said, but when you are constantly making horse parts to have them assembled to be a completed animal, I think you get very, you could probably carve those in your sleep. But as a result of asking to have a menagerie animal carved, they suddenly would completely change the line of production while they concentrated on making now either frog legs or kangaroo legs or polar bear legs and bodies compared to the typical horses that they were used to. So as a result, with production being slowed down, it was a jump in price for the cost of those animals. I guess that's about all I have to say this evening. Please come and see us either online or in person. And I'll return this back to Marissa and the ladies for any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you so much, Doug, for that great presentation. And the floor is now open for any Q&As. If you have them, please just drop them in the Q&A box. We also have a couple to start us off with. And so is it Stephanie or Stevie?
I go by Stevie at work, but it is Stephanie. It can be either or.
Well, I want to make sure I'm getting the right name. And I was like, I should have asked beforehand. So Stevie, I'm going to have you re-answer this question. I know you answered it in the Q&A box, but how do you strip the paint of your animals?
So in-house, we're using a lot of by hand. Obviously, a lot of the detailed carvings, we're using like smaller Dremel tools and old carving tools as well. But a lot of it really is literally just by hand. And then when we send anything down to Todd, he sends it to the paint strippers out for a couple of weeks. And then, you know, they have to spray it with water and then lets it dry out and all of that before they start working on it. So it's kind of been a combo platter.
All right, thank you. All right. On average, how long did it take to carve a menagerie animal compared to a horse?
I'll tackle that because I am a wood carver. An individual would probably take about 300 to 350 hours to do one horse. So as I mentioned with our production line that we had in the factory, things to go rather quickly. It was a matter of the skill of the master carver being able to put all the other parts together and then blend things. For example, if I'm carving a mane of a certain type on my head and neck as a master carver, now I get it placed onto the body, ready for glue up. You'd have to have in a space where the mane probably would fall over the top of the shoulder. So that all had to be blended, and they would blend other parts because I'm sure each leg would not be perfectly lined up that once, you know, you would carve it a little wide or fat per se. And as you put it onto the body, you'd have to blend it so you wouldn't have a funny bump there. Everything would have to be smooth. So that's what they did and passed it on to the paint shop, who would then do all the final sanding and you'd make sure everything else was smooth and then prepare it for the finishes to go on. I'd also like to say here that sandpaper at that time was literally sand glued to paper, and it didn't last like our modern sandpaper. So they would probably have used spoke shaves, which are small bladed drawing tools that would get rid of all the uneven carved chips and then make sure all the animals were blended so there'd be a smooth body to paint. Okay.
Great. Is there a ratio of menagerie animals to horses that must be followed, depending on if your carousel is 2 abreast, 3 abreast, or 4 abreast, or was it up to the individual buyers?
I could answer that too. I think because of the cost, it would be up to the buyer. The more money they had to spend, if they wanted to have only 1 or 2 or 3 animals, that'd be up to them. I think it'd be like your bigger machines, ladies, with the standing rows. I think there you would have to have more of menagerie animals. You wouldn't have all standing horses. You would have giraffes and other things. But on the inner rows, especially like on a traveling machine, it would be up to the person how much money they had to spend. The other thing here is on a traveling machine, these animals had tendency to be bumped around as they're traveled to the next place or the next carnival. And as a result, you really wouldn't want to spend a ton of money to have, let's say, roses or something carved on a horse, have it one bump smash into each other, and there goes all your extra payment for that carved detail. So there's more chance on park machines that you would really have a lot of menagerie animals compared to traveling machines. Okay.
For Stevie, it's really interesting that you chose specific kinds of animals to paint each animal. How did you go about choosing which kind for each animal?
Well, when it came to the giraffe, I specifically picked the reticulated because we have in Michigan Binder Park Zoo, which is the only zoo that has a giraffe in it. And so I should probably start back on this. We actually use the carousel a lot for training. And so we have summer camps called engineering days. And so I always bring the kids down and we show them the inside of the carousel. And so because of those, I thought, well, if kids could identify and recognize the animals, that would be great too, especially when they can go to other places. So I wanted it to be more specific so that that also kind of gave the operators some things that they can teach the kids too when they're coming to visit and ride. So.
Were menagerie animals jumpers or standers in general? Who would like to take that one?
I can't really answer for Doug, but he's probably got more information, but I know that I've seen them both, jumpers and standards. I know on my carousel, which I should have probably put in my presentation, all of mine are standards. And my lion and tiger are extremely enormous. And so, to balance out the carousel, it kind of looks like this, like a cross. So I've got the two chariots and then the lion and the tiger. And then like Doug was saying, it goes like a standard horse and then a full row of jumpers and then a menagerie and then a standard horse kind of thing around. So mine is for balance, I think, a lot. I don't know if it's necessarily just for aesthetics completely. What do you think, Doug?
I think it was for balance also because all of those standards have more bulk to them because they're not moving up and down. Their legs are down. You can put more, not necessarily more detail on it, but it's a lot different when all the legs have to be bent to make sure they safely go up and down on a ride. We have a Denzel line in our collection, and that guy's about 350 pounds, and the horses go about 125 to 150 pounds. So it makes a big difference that you would have those spread around the entire machine for balance.
So I will jump in and just say I agree with both of you. Ours is similar. We have a lion and a tiger, and they are both huge and are opposite of each other. We do have some jumping menagerie animals. We have four rabbits and 4 ostriches, and those are all jumpers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they look like they're in motion. And so when you're riding them, you do jump like a bunny when you're on that jumper.
All right. All right, Doug, so we have one audience question I'm popping up right now for you. And it was, did the Allen Herschell factory distinguish between a carousel and a merry-go-round? According to advertising on the side of the factory, it appears they may have.
Because of the age of operation for the Allen Herschell Company, which was 1915 through 1959 in North Tonawanda, then they moved into Buffalo. They were using both terms at that time. A lot of people have questioned whether if we spell carousel correctly, and this is a difference in really all the companies, and with having 4 in town, we've seen it with 2 R's, 2 L's, 2 S's, or a mixture of those. So there's really no right or wrong, I guess. Where the museum is owned by the Carrousel Society of the Niagara Frontier, where we use 1 R, and then on the building and most of our writings and stuff, we put down 2 R's. So when you go on that line, we're carousel.org, we have 2 R's in Carousel. So it's, I think sometimes it was whoever was painting the signs or making up the advertisement, well, whatever their fancy was, that's what they did. So there's no right or wrong there. They're both are the same things, a round machine that has horses and animals on it.
Thank you. What is the most known menagerie animal for each company?
Mhm.
We can talk about your different companies.
Ladies first.
I like I said earlier, I'm not a historian on all things Denzel. I will just say that, you know, I think the lion ends up getting a lot of attention from just general writers. And so because he is so large, he's kind of, his mouth is open. He does look a little bit more aggressive, like he's mid-roar. So I don't know if that's what they're known for, but that does get kind of called out by a lot of people who are writing it, and they find it really fascinating that they can get on a lion.
That's a really good question. I don't know. I know that like for me, I've seen a lot of deer Spielmans, but I also think I've seen a lot of like rabbits, because even like down in Dearborn in the 1913 Spielman Carousel they have down there at the Henry Ford Museum, they have a lot of the rabbits as well. What do you think, Doug?
I would think probably the polar bear that I mentioned earlier was in the elephant were very unique to the Allen Herschel company. And it's surprising because they didn't make many park machines. They were known for the traveling machine. That's a tough question because you see a mixture of things. One thing I find unique though, like on your giraffe has smiling with unique teeth, where other companies had a giraffe with that soft mouth like you would typically have on a live giraffe. So I think sometimes it depended on what the carvers were comfortable covering, because these guys didn't travel around like we can nowadays. They had to see the pictures in a book or something and try to be comfortable making them. So I think for Herschel Spielman and Allen Herschel, the frog is pretty unique too. Their kids get a kick out of riding on a frog with his clothes and stuff. Very good question.
I think what's interesting about my deer is that the neck is so detailed, whereas the body is not, with a lot of fur, whereas a lot of other Spielman deers, it is.
Mhm.
But how you definitely know it's a Spielman is that dog on the side.
Yes.
That's definitely one of his unique trademarks on those.
All right, we have a question from Kristen asking or stating that the carousel with the polar bear had a book written about it. And did you know that? I know I didn't know that. Doug, did you know?
I didn't know that either. I really don't know where the polar bear is right now either. So if it ended up at a museum or someplace where the public can see it would be great. And if that could be why the polar bear has a story about it. I don't know where it is.
Well, I think I can say for all of you here that we are interested in the title of that book, if you'd like to share that with us. All right, I'm going to end on a fun question, or what I think is a fun question to ask. What is your favorite menagerie animal? And I'm going to start off with Emily. Would you like to start answering this question?
I get that question a lot, actually. My favorite is actually the rabbit, along with my daughter. I find that the lion is so big that it's uncomfortable for me to sit on because it's just so wide. I mean, my son also has issues with it too. So it's a little hard to get up. You're not very graceful getting up onto it, but the rabbit has a special place for us as a family because we just love riding it. But the picture that I showed earlier, it is pretty iconic for our history actually to have that picture of the protester on the rabbit, and it's just a really great image. And so I personally like to ride that when I can.
I would say, actually I have three. I can't just choose one. I really, I like the giraffe and I like the deer. I also really like the goat. I think, I just find it's funny when you start restoring them and you start really, like when you get something down to bare wood and you just really admire the craftsmanship even more, and you're just, I don't know, it's hard. We always do that here. We're like, what's your favorite horse? You can't, you just fall in love with all of them, honestly.
Yeah, I've never seen the polar bear in person, but I like the polar bear. It's so unique. And we have a Spillman Carousel down on our waterfront now in Buffalo. And I like the deer an awful lot. It's a majestic looking animal on that ride with the antlers and everything.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
For Doug. So, like with my carousel having 3 different types of carvers on there, I'm curious, is it because of World War I, or like what happened with the factories during World War I and a lot of I don't know if I'm asking the question good. I just assume that like everything kind of stopped because of World War I. So then when you get into my carousel in the 20s, how did that work? Was it more piecemeal? Did they have a lot of talent still in the shops or not? Or did they have to loan other carvers out?
I don't know if they ever loaned other carvers out. They were pretty secretive in how they went about their business. From the way I understand it, I'm sure the war would have had a lot to do with it, because the carver that I was fortunate to meet, he was about 89 when I met him. He had gone off to World War I in France, and when he came back, the carving, he was still involved with the carving, but he also worked at other companies besides just going back to making animals. Sometimes the factory ran out of business and went bankrupt, so other companies bought parts of the bodies and stuff, or whatever carvings were left, and that's why you'll often see a mixture, or you'll see horse bodies from one company and legs from another, and they tried to have a quick turnaround where that obviously saved them time if they could buy work that was partially done and not worry about having it done. And actually in the 20s with the Herschell company, they started making aluminum parts. And eventually, I think we have a picture of a guy on a carving machine, because carvers were passing away, the master carvers, that they would have one guy on a pantograph type machine where he had a finished body and there were 2 block bodies above and below. And as he moved the follower over the finished body, routers would rough carve the other 4 bodies. So there's one guy making 4 bodies now. Then they would go to the shop, and the people that were left there in the carving shop had the skills to clean all those rough edges up and stuff. But then they attached a aluminum head, aluminum legs, and aluminum tail to the wood body, and they call that a half and half animal. And eventually they were all aluminum into the like late 50s and into the 60s. So you had a real transition from, if you had the skilled workers available, you could do things. If you didn't, maybe you ended up going out of business and others picked up where you left off, and probably why you have a mixed machine like that.
So I was going to say, I mean, I don't know if it was the case with yours, because I'm not too sure, but what we found in our research actually is that this is not the first carousel at Glen Echo Park. And so there was actually, I believe, a Herschell at the park before we got the 1921 Denzel. And when the park owners bought the Denzel, it was for a sum of money plus the carousel that was already on site. So the Denzel company ended up taking the other manufacturer's carousel, and I think we traced a lot of those animals to the one that's at San Francisco Zoo.
Mhm.
And so it is interesting to see that like they didn't mind taking someone else's animals and putting it on their machine, right? So I
Yeah.
don't know if that's what happened in this case, but I find it just fascinating. They're like, sure, just throw in that carousel that you already have. We'll repurpose it, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, it saves them some of their labor and costs.
Yeah. There's the carousel at San Francisco's Golden Gate Park is a Spillman. And if you look up on top where the sweeps that come off the center, where all the animals, the ride hangs from, you can see how they spliced on an extra section to make it into a park machine with standing row on the outside. So they did all kinds of crazy stuff like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, that makes sense because some of our horses, it's definitely like that. They've got Spillman legs, but then the body and everything is aloof. You know, that definitely makes sense. But I know like with our records with the Gwen family, they were the only owners that we know of. But they had a fire in like 1945, unfortunately, at their house. So then a lot of the records that they had were completely destroyed. So we don't really have any records of when they purchased it or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, because these are wooden animals, if there's storm damage or fire damage would take place, animals were hurt, well, you had the rest of the machine. Let's put some other animals on to make it still look nice and usable. So, that could happen too.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah.
And Stevie, you do have a comment from Dale Doctor, who says your carousel is comprised of loof bodies purchased and completed by Spillman after loof closed.
Ah,
There you go.
thank you, Dale. I do have a question for Dale. How did you find that answer? And if you do, please pass it on. I will put my contact information in there because any information to find out. I've only been here for 6 years with the carousel, so it's all brand new for me. So I like to get all of the information. So thank you so much.
All right, so that is all the questions I have for us today. Thank you so much to Emily, Stevie, and Doug for presenting on your carousels. All of your presentations were wonderful. And thank you to everyone that joined us for Carousel Chats Menagerie. There will be a survey sent out to you tomorrow if via your email address. If you could please fill that out and answer it for us. That helps us to produce further carousel chats and make sure that we're reaching the audience. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.